Good morning, members. Welcome to the Leveraging Assets Lessons Learned from Civida's Londonderry Affordable Housing Redevelopment webinar. My name is Anush Gunashan. I'm the Learning and Development Manager with ASHA. We would like to thank the Alberta Real Estate Foundation, AREF, for funding this webinar. The Calgary Homeless Foundation and Horizon Housing received grant funding from AREF, and ASHA is delivering this webinar on behalf of them. The recording of the webinar will be available on ASHA's YouTube channel, and the link will be shared with all the participants. Before we begin the presentation, we would like to acknowledge that today we are gathering on Treaty 6, 7, and 8 territories. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our communities. We acknowledge that we are here together to learn from and celebrate this territory and must continue to engage in leadership that commits to truth and reconciliation. Now let's welcome our presenter, Mark Hussein, Vice President of Property Portfolio Management with Civida. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Anush, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm happy to speak about Londonderry. I'm very pleased that ASHA decided to invite me to speak on behalf of Civida on this project. Very proud of it. But I acknowledge too that you don't necessarily want to hear me speak for an hour. So there'll be some back and forth if you're so inclined, and some time for questions. I know the title of the presentation was Leveraging Assets, and we'll definitely talk about some of that. But really, you know, kind of at Civida, and I'm sure for all of you, the assets we look at are holistic. It's not just the properties that are our assets, it's our people, it's our customers, it's our stakeholders. It is a full-scale leveraging of what we have as assets in the organization to make this project successful. So with that said, there's going to be certain times where I have checkpoint questions. Feel free to jump in. I do not have all the expertise. There's tons of expertise in the room virtually that, you know, the whole group could benefit from. If you have an observation or a story, I'm happy to let everybody go from there. So what we're going to talk about today is just an overview of our Londonderry development. We're going to talk about Civida's capital development process. And I just want to say that that's the process that we used. It's iterative. We will refine some of the portions of it as we go, and you'll see some of the lessons learned from that process at the end. And then I'm open to questions. So let's dive right in to the Londonderry redevelopment. So this was Londonderry before. It was built in 1971. You can see it's just as attractive as just about every community housing property that was built between the 1970s and 1980s in Alberta. Ironically, it was in very close to the neighborhood that I grew up in Edmonton. There's a mall not far from this property that I used to get kicked out of when I was in high school, skipping school. So I knew the neighborhood well. And if you ever get a chance to visit it, there's the best fried chicken just walking distance from the Londonderry development. So definitely a selling feature. But it was built in 1971. It was a property that was in what we call our city federal bucket. It wasn't owned by the ASHC. It was just administered by the ASHC. And it had some significant challenges with respect to pests and asbestos and just, you know, the challenges that we're all facing with this legacy community housing portfolio that I'm sure everybody is fully acknowledging. So in 2013, we decided that we were going to vacate the units by attrition. It just didn't make sense to turn them over at that point. It would be very cost intensive. We had about 80 families living there. We offered all of the families after 2014 the first right to move to other properties in our portfolio. All of them kind of took advantage of it. And we had the whole thing done by the end of 2015. We had the property vacant. So we needed to do something with this property, okay? Like, it's a beautiful piece of land. And just like all of our social housing properties, they are in mature neighborhoods. They are well serviced by amenities, schools, transit, major corridors. They're very, very sparsely densified. And you'll see that when we talk about what we did on the redevelopment. They're prime pieces of land. They're prime places to raise a family and be settled. And, you know, we had this derelict 80-unit townhome site that needed some work to it. And so we came up with a plan to redevelop the site. And the first portion of that was the public engagement ceremony. And so you see some pictures here from our public engagement, but there was a lot of work that went into leveraging the assets of our stakeholders before we got to that public engagement. You know, we talked to the city of Edmonton about what we could do to redevelop that site. The land was theirs. We had a number of options on redevelopment to be able to fund it. You know, one was for them to give us the land for free. That wasn't palatable to them. I don't know why. If it was me, I would have given me the land, but that wasn't the case. We ended up with a 60-year land lease that allowed us to pursue financing on the property. We also submitted this for investment from the provincial government, and we did receive 49.5 million, and I'll talk about that. But we had these public engagement these public engagement sessions, excuse me, because, you know, we were building a massive development in an established neighborhood that was primarily populated by low-rise apartments and single-family homes. And there were some concerns by the residents, but we were able to galvanize our stakeholders to be able to alleviate many of their concerns. So we had in Edmonton, I don't know if this is the same as other communities, but we have community leagues, and they offer programs for kids and activities in the neighborhood, and they run the community halls. We met with the community league in Kilkenny, where the Londonderry project is located, and we got their buy-in pretty quickly. And in fact, they became some of the strongest advocates for the redevelopment. And some of that had to do with the fact that when 80 families left the community, that impacted the population at school, that impacted how many kids were in kids programs. And kind of the lifeblood of any neighborhood is how many kids you have in it. And so when we said this was going to be a property for families, they really got on board. A lot of the challenges we faced from the public outside of parking concerns had to do with, well, would there be room in the schools? Do you bring crime? All of those kinds of things. So we were able to partner with the Edmonton Public School Board, as well as the Edmonton City Police, and leverage those assets to demonstrate, number one, there is capacity in the local schools for the amount of children that we would be bringing. And that was another area of concern that was alleviated immediately. And then the city police came to discuss how there isn't more crime on social housing sites compared to broader neighborhoods. And in fact, we don't bring crime to neighborhoods. And I know it sounds a little bit challenging given some of the antisocial behavior that many of us are experiencing in and around our sites, but it is an indication of what's happening in the communities around our sites as much as it's happening in our sites. And then we galvanized a lot of the local affordable housing advocates and settlement agencies. They spoke on behalf of this project. So the Mennonite Center for Newcomers, they came and spoke. Multicultural Health Brokers came and advocated on our behalf. There was some verbal opposition in the public engagement sessions, but I'm proud to say there was no opposition at the public hearing for rezoning. And there was a unanimous decision by council to move forward with this project. So that doesn't happen all the time. That's not the standard by which we measure ourselves, but it was heartwarming that the community either, felt listened to enough that they didn't feel like they had to go to council to complain about our development. And a number of community members were in support of it. So just some project stats. The total cost is approximately $91 million. We got a government grant for just under 50 million for the construction, and the balance of the project was financed through a bond issue of High C. So High C is a housing investment corporation. They work as a debt aggregator, so they will assist affordable housing developers in accessing capital by amalgamating all of the projects that need to be funded and working with the bond market to get that funding. And then we worked with the city of Edmonton as well to get a long-term nominal lease for the land. And so those are some pictures of what it looks like inside. And I have a little bit more. We're very proud of how the property looks, the fits and finishes, and I'll get more into that as we go through the presentation. Okay, so this is what the project looks like. All right, and so this overview, it's 240 suites. So we tripled the density on this site to 240 suites. You can see it's in four buildings. Building A has 80 suites. Building B has 41 suites. Same with Building C, and Building D has 78 suites. And so we do have 194 underground parking stalls and 38 surface parking stalls. And so the 38 are primarily for the commercial spaces and visitors. The 194 are for residents. We don't have one spot per suite because our experience and our research shows us that for Civida residents, we only use between 60 and 75% of the required parking stalls. So at the time, we were able to push this through council to say we get a variance on the parking requirement for the development. Since that time, Edmonton has eliminated parking requirements for development. So we could build with no parking, but that wouldn't necessarily have ingratiated us to the neighbors. So we have a site office that is a leasing office. And then what I like about this development is the bottom levels are two-story townhomes. So we needed some big suites because of the clientele that we serve. And so the bottom floor of the entire development are two-story townhomes, and then the apartments start on the third floor and higher. So we have 2 and 3 bedroom suites. And then in the center of the 4 units is a 2-story atrium. We have 4 community rooms. 1 can be rented out as a party room for the residents. 2 are being used at a nominal lease by the Boys and Girls Club, who are doing activities for kids, homework help, and other community building activities in the building. And then the 3rd is office for the City of Edmonton social work office. So they're going to be there 24/7, providing programming, resources, assistance to the residents. And that part of the development was really important to us because, when you have a development of this size, what we wanted to do is make sure we had the capacity to build community in the site. And so we leveraged another asset, which is our partnerships with other agencies. Civida itself is not equipped to do that work, but there are very good partners in and around the city and in and around the community that are willing to do that and help us out. And it's been a really good partnership. The City of Edmonton currently runs community centers on about 13 of our sites, and then we made sure we had a dedicated space for them in this development as well. And so you can see we have 2 commercial spaces. We were looking at a local coffee shop or a dental office or something like that, just to bring this site to the community so that it's not just Civida's site at Londonderry, there's community access to the site as well. And so the work internally that the Boys and Girls Club is doing is for the entire community, not just for the residents. We have a public courtyard that's kind of a two-season space for anybody living in the community. And then in the back, we have a private courtyard. Sorry about that. And then again, we have some barrier-free and adaptable suites in the building. And that's just part of the practice of our development now, is that we have adaptable and barrier-free suites as well. Okay, so that's Londonderry. I'll go into our capital development process now, and then there'll be a little bit of time for some back and forth here. So, you know, at Civida, we have kind of a four-stage development process: introduction, initiation, planning, execute, well, five-stage, I should say, execution, and closeout and turnover. So the presentation is organized to highlight our milestones at the beginning, middle, and end of our projects. And there are these four key phases in managing the life cycle of our project. And each of these phases have corresponding activities that we'll explore at a high level. So the first is initiation. And in this, the organization's capacity is assessed. And so it's really important for us to be honest about what our capacity is as developers. There are some things we can do and some things we just are not able to do. We don't have the internal resources to do all of this work. And so that's when we have to assess where we can get those resources. This is also where we decide if this is the right time for your organization to undertake the project. And so we have really good, very capable folks at Civida, but burning them out does nothing for our bottom line. And it's really important, I've found in my time, to know what to say no to. It's just as important on what to say no to as what's important to say yes to. So after we assess our capacity, we explore the idea. And so it's born out of a need or a goal or an opportunity that's presented itself. So, you know, in this scenario of Londonderry, Civida has over 9,000 families on our community housing priority list. Those 9,000 families are waiting for an affordable home. So we definitely have the need. We had a plot of land that was available where a community housing site once stood. So, and we had the buy-in from our partners, our funders, to be able to get going on this. So it was an excellent opportunity to move forward. You know, there are many ways to secure land. You know, if you're flush with cash, a direct purchase, engaging a long-term lease, or, you know, a lot of you are familiar with Canada Lands. They do RFPs for some of their lands. There's ways that you can get land or access to land to be able to do this. So, and then the other thing we need to understand is what your design guidelines are like. So we have design guidelines that identify our minimum requirements for things. And it's an ever-evolving document to capture requirements and initiatives to enhance our tenants' living experience within the development. This guideline also places an emphasis on the use of products and materials that are durable, easy to maintain, and can be easily sourced for future replacements or maintenance work. So we make those decisions at the outset of the planning phase, and we have our design guidelines so that once we're built, we try and take as much pressure off the operation as possible by having the right materials, having durable materials that are easily replaced. So we also look at things like accessibility features and energy efficiency targets. Like, do we want to meet a net zero or a net zero development? Is that feasible? Is that cost effective? Is it just the right thing to do? So those are some of the things that we'd be looking at more in the future than we did at this Londonderry project. And that's a lessons learned as well. And our third element here is we do a project feasibility. So, our planning consultant or our group will take us through our requirements from the development exploration and determine these requirements and work out some calculations to determine the building massing, the number of units and suites that can be built based on the rezoning, land size, those kinds of things. And this is where we communicate any program and spatial needs and requirements to the planning consultant so they can carve out these spaces in the buildings. This is when we said we wanted an atrium where our residents would run into each other, have casual conversations and meet their neighbors to try and combat social isolation within large rental buildings. This is where we said we want 4 community rooms so that we can have programming inside. So this one, after that, we typically have a conceptual design, and at the same time, we finalize a needs assessment to determine the need or demand from your client groups. And so this needs assessment is something that also our funders with the provincial government working with municipalities have held on to, and they're working on a needs assessment, a detailed needs assessment for housing in each municipality. So at this time too, we also do a survey of the typical market rents within an area. And that helps inform what affordable is, how we can move forward, what our target rents will be, what the capital investment capabilities and other programming requirements are. And then, it starts to help inform the operating model that we'll be using. So you've heard me talk for a while here. I am wondering if we want to just say, what are the pain points and challenges people have faced in the initiation phase? So you don't have to shoot it out, but it's just a rhetorical question to think, when you're doing a project, what are the pain points and challenges you have? For us, oftentimes the challenge is, who are we building this project for? Where are we going to get the resources to be able to do it? Are we honest with ourselves about the capabilities in our organization? And then what are your must-haves for the housing that you're building, right? What are the important considerations that you have in development? So for Civida, it's important that we had larger size units because that makes up a sizable chunk of our waiting list. It's important that we have fits and finishes that are durable so that we're not changing melamine countertops every few months, every few years. And you saw in the first slide, it's important that we have washers and dryers in our units. That sounds crazy, but this is a mixed model development, and that's now an expectation in a lot of developments, is that there's in-suite laundry. So I'll move on to the second slide now here. And so this is our planning phase. And so at this stage, we have some or all of the funding available to move forward with design and construction. So sometimes you just have the funding available to get the design work done, and that informs how you will procure the work. First, you must procure other third-party services that will assist in your pre-development work. This might include public engagement consultants, geotechnical work, land surveys, environmental consultants. That's not a comprehensive list. There are many more. In some cases, your design or prime consultant can also act as the public engagement and rezoning consultant. That's what we had with GEC Architecture in the Londonderry project. And then we have to do the public consultation and rezoning. And it's a good practice to meaningfully engage the community residents and other stakeholders, especially if the site needs to be rezoned. This is not only is this a regulatory process, but it allows the team, and this is what we found, to gain social capital with the neighbors and community stakeholders. So we leverage those relationships and we sought input on matters affecting them in their community. So oftentimes, if the community feels they've not been sufficiently consulted before, you may receive delays, deferrals, or even a rejection of your zoning reapplication. That's happened. The delay has happened. We've been lucky in other projects that we haven't been rejected, but I do know Londonderry went off really well compared to some of our other redevelopments or new developments where those public engagements have been quite contentious. So if we move on to design work, your prime consultant may be the consultant that assists you during the public engagement and rezoning, or you can have a completely different one. It just depends on your preference. Once rezoning has been approved, the design and construction team, depending on your construction delivery method, will start to work on progressing drawings from conceptual to schematic design to detailed design, and then finally construction documents. And you'll have a series of meetings to provide your design team with program requirements and define your sustainability targets. So really and truly, you need to know what your program requirements are and be very clear on that. That pre-work is so important moving forward. And so, look, there's a number of ways to skin a cat here, and deciding on what construction methodology you'll use, it really just determines what your needs and risks are. So you can do a design bid build. That's the old school way where you get everything designed to construction drawings and then tender out just the construction of it. You can design build, which in a nutshell is, here's all of my requirements and here's the budget. You can't break this budget. So let's go from there. And then the newest one is the integrated project delivery, where everybody kind of works together, you know, from sub trades all the way up to the architect to design the building all in one shot, and then you hopefully get a lot of economies of scale. That's not a complete explanation of IPD. You could do an hour presentation on just that. And so we used at Londonderry construction management for ours, just because we were able to be a little bit more flexible. It worked for what the design was, but you know, depending on what we do in the future, we may change our approach. So let's talk about what are some of the pain points in the planning phase. You know, in our planning phase, we had public engagement. We had a lot of questions that came back from the community. We changed some of our massing to reflect what the community liked. And in fact, one of our public engagements was where community members were able to put forward their ideas about how the building should look on the property, which is how we came up with the X development and the step downs from the front street to the back street. You know, and so under this phase, what are important considerations when developing housing prototype program model and a housing prototype design? And then, so the things that we need to put in our proposal, our project charter and overall work plan. That was a big lessons learned, that we needed a very good project charter. We needed a public engagement plan, construction project and management plan. We had working drawings and a preliminary marketing strategy. So let's move on to execution. This one is the shortest of them from slides, but the longest one with respect to how the work gets done. You know, at this stage, you have all the construction documents finalized, all the scopes have been tendered. The team has obtained permits and construction begins. And this side, we had a project manager meet with both the design and construction team regularly, almost weekly. Our PM is responsible for managing the project budget, change orders, schedule changes, and all potential risks, and was also responsible for project documentation. So we had monthly reports and status updates on our projects, and those reports went right to our board for their line of sight. And then the budget monitoring. So the PM also monitors the project costs and forecasts, cost to complete. Apart from the prime consultant who certifies the progress claims, the PM works with a cost consultant to verify and report on the overall project costs. So, you know, I mean, the last thing you want to do is not have a line of sight to the budget as things increase. I will say we had the extreme fortune of building this project during the pandemic, which created a significant amount of risk for sourcing materials, sourcing materials, and then potential labor interruptions. We were pretty lucky that the construction manager we worked with was Stuart Olson in this case. They had some risk mitigations for materials, and we didn't experience a huge impact of COVID on the work site. But it was a risk that we were monitoring quite closely. So I will just move to the next slide here. This is the big one for us, is closeout and turnover. So, you know, when we looked at closeout and turnover, this is where for a property like this, we would look at long-term financing 6 months before. So at least 6 months before, that's when we start lining up the long-term financing for the project. And so in this one, we worked through high C, like I said, but there's conventional lenders, there's CMHC, or other brokers you can use to secure financing on your behalf. And then you need a pre-leasing plan. So in some developments, pre-leasing quite easy. And I say that facetiously, but I know, you know, when you have a lodge in some locations, I mean, there's a waiting list for it. For this Londonderry project, while we have 9,000 families on the waiting list, it was still in the midst of the pandemic that we were starting the pre-lease. So people were wary to move. That, you know, not necessarily, but they were wary to move. But also on top of that, this building is not, the operating model is not under SHAR. So the rents are not set at SHAR rents. They're still very affordable. We have deep subsidy, near market and market units, but they're not the SHAR rental rates. And so that we couldn't just take 240 families off of our wait list to be able to fill the building. So pre-leasing was a must. Once the buildings are substantially complete and the occupancy permit was obtained, we had tenants start to move in the building, but there's still work to be done. And so for any of you who have moved into a brand new house or a brand new condominium, you know there's deficiency work that needs to be done and all of that. And so we do work through that while we have tenants living. We let them know that this is what's going on. A lot of them are very thrilled to have a new place to live. But it's still a challenge at times to work through that. And then we typically have workmanship warranty for 1 year from the substantial completion date. And then warranties for larger components of the buildings are longer. This is when we get a really good coordination between our property management team and our development team. So right at the outset, our property management team and our development team work together to say, you know what, we built this building at Parkdale and here's some of the challenges we're having with maintaining the suites. So here's some of the changes we should make to our suite design or our, you know, specifications for flooring, painting, those kinds of things to integrate into a new development. And now at the outset, this is where the development team and the asset management and property management team work together to get trained on the building systems, on how things work. They walk through and do deficiencies. I'll talk about that as we go through, but one of the most powerful things we did, not only for our tenants, but for our teams, is that we had days where a bunch of staff would go to site pick one of the wings of the property and go through and check all the doors, cabinet doors, all the interior doors, all the blinds, to see that everything was in working order. All the taps were turned on, all the drains were checked, all the toilets were flushed, just so when somebody moved in, we had confidence that those things were done. And so that is really part and parcel of the transition from developing to operating affordable housing. And really, we really had an eye to making this a home for everybody that lived there, just like I'm sure you do as well. So I'm going to move to the next slide. Here we go. So I'm just going to go right to the redevelopment lessons learned. I think that's what everybody is interested in. And so I've got a few slides here. So what went right? Well, the community engagement went really well. We had 4 sessions that were all very well attended and well received. And this community engagement was respectful and informed. That's not always been my experience with community engagement. And in fact, on another development in another part of the city, we sat through 2 days of residents complaining about the development that we were going to do in a greenfield area. Now, we've kind of looked at why Londonderry was so different from that second development, and there's a few reasons. One is we already had a site at Londonderry that was community housing prior. The second one, it was just a greenfield. And in fact, the community had thought of it as a park for the last 30 years. So Londonderry already existed. Number 2, the schools and the ancillary businesses and community felt the loss of those 80 families leaving the community. You know, they asked about soccer and hockey programs, how we could facilitate that. The Londonderry, the Kilkenny community really wanted those kids back in the community. And so it was really good. And we had answers for all of their questions about the schools, about crime, about parking. We had answers for all of those things. So again, like I said, the Civida EPS, the City of Edmonton, the Community League, and City Councilor participation was collaborative and professional. And we had good buy-in from the council at the time, and the local councilor was present at all of those meetings. And again, like I said earlier, unanimous support received for rezoning, and nobody came to speak in opposition of the rezoning from the community. We did get lots of positive press coverage on TV and in print. So what else went right? On the design and construction, we had a well thought out project charter that aligned with our values. And I can't stress this enough. Having a project charter with your construction team and your design team, so important at the outset, because when decisions get difficult, you can go back to that project charter to guide your way. It really is an important document. It takes a while to get done at the outset. And honestly, sometimes it feels like you're spinning your wheels, but especially since we had, pandemic in the midst of this construction, going back to that project charter was one of the most important things that we did. So many of you may know, we opened mixed income development near the football stadium called Parkdale 1. And that was done a little bit prior to Londonderry. But like I said before, we were really able to integrate some of the lessons learned from the Parkdale development into this development. So we integrated new design guidelines that we learned from this. And just by the way the project was publicly tendered, we ended up having the same general contractor and consultants on this team as Parkdale. So we were able to have an integrated team for both projects, where you didn't have to have a feeling out process of working together or anything like that. There was a vested interest by all stakeholders to ensure problems experienced at Parkdale were not repeated. Some of these included how to deal with corridor ceilings, the boiler selection, roof venting design, and security concerns, as well as the barrier-free design. All of those lessons learned went right into this development. And then we also, like, to ensure the team captured as much information as possible, the schematic design phase was represented by a cross-departmental team from Civida. So this included folks from our customer service, leasing, asset management, capital maintenance. This allowed everybody to be informed of current issues, operating issues, equipment challenges, maintenance, security, safety, or other related issues. And I said this before, and it was spoken to in our project charter, but we really focused on designing homes and forming a larger part of the community as opposed to just building these 4 buildings. And we're starting to see a vernacular change in our team, where we talk about providing homes instead of units. And I really hate the term units. We're providing a home, even if it's a 1-bedroom home. This is a home for a person, and that had to be at the center of our design and our operation. So again, here, the design focused on current client and organizational needs, and we needed to reassess this during early construction. And then the finishes selections throughout. So we chose finishes that look very nice. They're not luxurious, but they are on par with what you would get at a mid-market development here in Edmonton. They look clean, they look new, but they're also durable. And that durability is quite important because sometimes some of our units have 4 or 5 children in them. I have 2, and my kids live hard. There's always a dent in my wall. So I would just say that we really informed how we develop things, what our suites look like and how they're going to be used. And then to do that, we had our construction manager mock up 2 suites. So while we were constructing everything, they took some time and built out 2 suites like they would be the finished project. We were able to walk through at that time and say, this works, this doesn't work, this needs to be different, this is good. Actually, if you can, at no massive additional cost, change all of our cabinet doors to not slam, that would really help with some of the challenges we're facing at other sites. That was one of the most powerful tools. And it also made it really real for our teams when they walk through those mock-up suites to say, okay, this is something that I can get behind. This is how we're providing housing for the people that need help with us. And building careers that fit. So this, I talked about leveraging stakeholders. We leveraged goodwill on this project. We partnered with the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, and we offered an employability program on this site. So tenants that lived in Civida community housing, near market housing, or received a rent supplement were able to apply for work on the project under a special program. And they were able to try, Nate opened their trades, school of trades for a Saturday where anybody that lived in Civida housing could go and try a myriad of trades to see if they liked it. They would use that to then apply to the specific sub-trades of their choice or desire. And we had about 5 to 10% of our workforce on this site come from our tenant base. And we incentivized it by saying, we won't count the increase in your income against your rent for the duration of the project. So people could earn more without it impacting their well-being or their rent. We've had a few folks actually go through and get their trade certification through this program. It's something that the government of Alberta looks at with admiration, because for projects over a certain number or a certain value, you're required to provide an apprenticeship program or apprenticeship plan. And this was our apprenticeship plan. I'm really proud that we were able to, meet some of our tenants where they're at and provide them some opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And it really had to do well with Stuart Olson and Nate as well as partners on this. So what else went right? Well, we had internal and third-party benchmark design reviews, and that helped to eliminate some of the coordination issues we may have had towards the end. We had monthly meetings with our finance team to coordinate requirements for draws and affirm the project budget status. We had excellent reporting from the project managers on the progress. Those updates went to our officers who are now VPs. We changed that, and the board. And then we did an early crime prevention through environmental design, engagement, and approval. So all of our sites are what's called CEPTED evaluated. So the City of Edmonton Police Department will come in and do an assessment on the design standards for crime prevention through environmental design. So you can see from these pictures, we have an open courtyard, but everybody's window looks onto that courtyard. So there's not the opportunity necessarily for antisocial or nefarious behavior because there's community, there's a view spot to it. Our windows are bright, the color schemes are wide open, we have good sight lines on the site, we have cameras throughout. So it's been a very good partnership and one that I would continue. And then with respect to the handover to operations and maintenance, we did a lot of video recorded training sessions from those providers who installed our boilers on how to maintain things, and so that none of that all becomes integrated knowledge into our teams, and it's easily accessible, as opposed to having it done just through either reading it in a manual or figuring it out as you go, or one person telling another. We had some excellent training videos on our systems, how to maintain them, how to troubleshoot them, and things like that. Okay, so this is what everybody wants to know. What are areas for improvement? And there are lots, and that's okay. On design and construction, I feel, and I think our team feels, that we really missed an opportunity for solar panels, a living wall, net zero ready, those kinds of things. Not only do they provide, just social benefit for, reducing our carbon footprint and being environmentally sustainable, but they also could potentially provide our tenants with more affordability if we're generating our own power and things like that. So cost estimates could have been tighter with better benchmarks, and some of this kind of it's just a learning opportunity for us with respect to how to do better budgeting, how to be tighter with, how do we benchmark what our cost estimates are. And you'll see why in the next one. We're not a build and sell developer, okay? I think that much is obvious. We're not going to build a 240 unit development and try and sell it to Aimco to recoup our capital. We build and hold these things for 50 years or more. And the decisions that we make in the design phase are with an eye to providing a home to a certain subset of the population, as well as keeping those properties in really good repair for the duration of their lifestyle at a more economical cost. It seems almost impossible. And when we deal with contractors and general contractors from the outside, 99% of what they build is either, build and sell, or, it's a 2-bedroom condominium kind of development, or a rental for somebody in the market. And it's not necessarily with a guise to the special population that we serve, or how we're going to be responsible for these properties for, perpetuity. And so that part of it, we need to be better at the outset to explain exactly what we're doing and how our clients live in our properties. And so look, overlooked in the initial scope was a really, a good marketing plan, a rental plan for the commercial units, the future plan for the site office, whether we're going to use it or not, or turn it into something else. Things like signage and wayfinding, branding opportunities were missed, and then how to market before substantial completion. Like, those are lessons that we're going to learn, especially on the few market units that we have, that we're really going to take with us moving forward. And then scheduling the pre-handover reviews for operations. Once these things are done, it's our operations team that takes over, and we want to make sure moving forward they have even more of a level of comfort with the property. They did have some. We took some learnings from Parkdale. We're taking some more learnings from Londonderry as we move forward. And then, we had some challenges with appliance procurement, only because on top of a pandemic, there was this backlog in shipping. If you all remember, there was so many shipping ships and shipping containers in the Port of Vancouver that didn't get to dock, and the Port of Los Angeles that didn't get to dock. And on many of those ships were our washers and dryers. So I hope that's a once in a lifetime event, but figuring out how to tighten up those procurements with our procurement team is a lesson learned for sure. And then look, the pandemic was not something that we planned for. But it did affect material costs and availability and appliances for sure. It also affected what we could do with pre-leasing, and we used our design guidelines to choose alternative materials to maintain our schedules and our costs. But we also looked at just innovative ways to figure things out. So with that, I've spoken for 52 minutes, and I apologize for that, but I will stop sharing my screen, and we have about 8 minutes for questions, I guess. Hey.
Thanks so much, Mark. So if anyone has questions, you can please unmute your microphone and ask your questions.
Can I just say something real quick?
Yeah.
I see that Donna Monkhouse is on the call, and I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the special contribution that she made to this project. If you go on the Google machine, you'll see a full 2-page article on Londonderry where Donna spoke about how important the project was, and that really kickstarted both the community and city council in really putting their weight behind it. So from that to the design, she had a really instrumental part to play, and I just wanted to make sure that we made note of that.
I can see lots of thank yous, and while we're waiting for questions, I just would like to remind the participants that right after the webinar, there will be a very brief survey. Please take 2 minutes to participate in the survey. Your feedback really helps us improve our webinars. Okay, I see lots of thank yous.
I can ask a question if no one's asking. Mark, what would you say, I guess, is the, like, out of the whole project, what are you the most proud of? Like, what was your...
That's a good question. I think, like growing up in that neighborhood, like I'm most proud of the potential that redevelopment is going to bring. We're going to bring 240 families into those schools, close to the pool, and then we're going to provide them with an affordable rent. Like what I'm really proud of is that it's the best looking development in that area. It's really beautiful, and it's not because we made luxurious choices. We just made choices to say everybody deserves a home they can be proud of, and that's what we provided. So
Yes, hello, I would have a question. So
Go ahead.
thank you, Mark, for your presentation. With regards to the $50 million grant you received from the government of Alberta, so how and where in the government of Alberta did you guys find that?
It's a loaded question, my friend.
Yes.
I think, if I'm to be honest with you, part of it was preparation and part of it was circumstance. So we got that money not long after the provincial government in Alberta changed to an NDP government. And for a number of years, we had been submitting the Londonderry redevelopment as our primary capital project to be done. And so it took 2 or 3 iterations in the business plan to get it taken care of, but it was honestly a surprise. I don't want to say surprise, but we just got a letter one day that said we will be issuing you a $49.5 million grant for the development of this affordable housing project.
Mm-hmm. So do you think you would receive that same amount today or next year? Should you do this project again?
Honestly, I don't know. I would imagine likely no. But that doesn't mean that there's not grant money coming for redevelopment. I just it kind of was at a time where we had a project ready and they had some cash to spend, right? So I'm not banking on 70% grant necessarily, but I will ask for it.
And was that just by talking to people at Seniors and Housing, or were you guys talking to people from Treasury or from infrastructure, or?
It had a lot to do with the Seniors and Housing group. They were pretty strong advocates for it. And like I say, it had been in our business plan for a number of years.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But also, just Rock, one other note is, I would be remiss if I didn't say, it also helped that the city of Edmonton came to bat with the land, right? And with a vehicle for the land, because then that also was a contribution on their part as well. Right?
Okay, thank you. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I'm wondering, since your project used Housing Investment Corporation financing, if you have any thoughts about what kind of housing providers in Alberta should be looking at that financing source.
Say that again, Phil, I'm sorry.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts about which housing providers in Alberta should be considering Housing Investment Corporation financing since you use that source?
Yeah, like I think it depends on the project, right? I think the project, it depends on the project. But honestly, if you're going to do something large and long-term, they're a pretty good resource. Like my financing is, the rate is guaranteed for 30 years. So that looks good now, right? So I really think that depending, if you're going to go for a larger sum, to have that cost certainty will help, okay?
Okay, thanks again, Mark Singh. And no more questions from the participants. Again, we would like to thank you for the presentation. We could see from the feedback of participants, everyone really liked it. So thanks again for your time and excellent presentation. We would also like to thank Alberta Real Estate Foundation for granting funds for hosting this event. So thank you, everyone, and you all have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.